The hearing room in Washington was tense. Cameras rolled as Justice Jackson leaned forward, interrupting Representative Jasmine Crockett for the 7th time. Each interruption had grown sharper, as if the justice was trying to corner Crockett, pressing her with questions that seemed designed to shake her confidence. But Crockett didn't flinch. She answered each challenge with precision, her voice steady, her posture firm. The audience leaned closer with every exchange. Some began whispering, wondering if Crockett would finally stumble. Yet the interruptions only fueled her determination. By the 7th interruption, a hush had fallen across the chamber. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing that something bigger was unfolding. Justice Jackson's tone was crisp, almost impatient, but Crockett met it head-on. Then came the 8th round. The justice pressed again, her words pointed and sharp. This time Crockett paused. She looked around the chamber, her gaze sweeping over the lawmakers, the press, and the cameras. Then, with perfect timing, she delivered an answer so clear and unshakable that the entire room froze. Her explanation didn't just respond to the question, it unraveled the assumptions behind it. Gasps echoed through the hall. The justice leaned back, caught off guard, as Crockett's words rippled across the audience. Washington insiders immediately recognized the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just a sharp exchange, it was a turning point. Crockett had not only defended her ground but shifted the entire conversation. Within hours, her 8th answer was everywhere. Played on news channels, clipped on social media, dissected by pundits. Supporters called it a masterclass in resilience, while critics struggled to counter the clarity of her logic. Washington had been shaken, and a new wave of attention surrounded Representative Crockett. She walked out of the chamber with cameras flashing, no longer just a participant in the hearing, but the name everyone was talking about. As Crockett left the chamber, the reporters swarmed. Microphones and cameras crowded around her, desperate to capture her reaction. She didn't raise her voice or celebrate the moment. Instead, she walked calmly, answering questions with measured words. "Representative, did you expect Justice Jackson to interrupt you so many times?" one journalist shouted. Crockett stopped for a second, her eyes sharp. "I expected the truth to make some people uncomfortable," she said. "But I also expected to be heard. And today, the American people heard me." That single line struck like lightning. News outlets clipped it instantly. Anchors repeated it on live television. Social media turned it into a trending quote, pairing it with the footage of her 8th answer. The phrase became a rallying cry, a reminder that silence could no longer be forced. Inside the halls of power, reactions split. Some lawmakers praised Crockett's composure, while others criticized her for challenging the justice so directly. But one fact was undeniable. The balance of the exchange had shifted. Crockett was no longer the one on defense. She had turned the spotlight back on the questions themselves, and on those who asked them. Washington thrives on spectacle, but it also remembers moments that feel historic. And by the end of the day, people weren't talking about the interruptions anymore. They were talking about the response that shook the chamber. By the next morning, the ripple effect was undeniable. Every major news network replayed the exchange on loop. Headlines read, "Crockett's 8th answer stops the hearing cold," and "unshakable response leaves Washington buzzing." Commentators debated endlessly. Some framed Crockett as fearless, standing tall against authority. Others insisted she had overstepped, daring to challenge a justice so directly. But no matter which side they took, her name was everywhere. On Capitol Hill, whispers spread. Lawmakers exchanged cautious glances in committee rooms. A few admitted privately that they had underestimated her. Crockett wasn't just surviving the heat of national attention. She was thriving in it. Meanwhile, her supporters flooded social media with clips and hashtags, amplifying her words into a digital echo that couldn't be ignored. In districts far from Washington, ordinary people who rarely tuned into hearings were now watching, replaying her answer and sending it to friends. Behind closed doors, strategists and staffers tried to calculate what this meant for the balance of power. Crockett had taken what was supposed to be a moment of weakness, 7 interruptions designed to throw her off course, and turned it into an unforgettable demonstration of control. And Washington, for once, was forced to pay attention. Inside private offices across Washington, the mood was unsettled. Staffers whispered about how a single exchange had shifted the tone of the week. Lobbyists who once brushed off Crockett's influence suddenly wanted to know more about her strategy. Justice Jackson, meanwhile, maintained her composure in public. She declined to comment when pressed by reporters, insisting that the hearing would speak for itself. But those close to the chamber noticed something. Her 8th interruption had not been followed by a 9th. She had pulled back, and that silence spoke louder than any remark. Crockett, on the other hand, held a quiet meeting with her closest advisors. They reviewed the clips circulating online and the surge of public support. One aide remarked, "This wasn't just a response. It was a statement. People are seeing you differently now." Crockett only nodded, aware of the weight that came with the attention. Elsewhere, veteran lawmakers began debating strategy. Some believed Crockett's rising influence could be harnessed, while others warned it could disrupt the careful balance of alliances. But no matter their position, one truth was clear. She had become impossible to ignore. That night, Washington insiders gathered in their usual restaurants and lounges, where political chatter never stops. For once, the talk wasn't about polls or bills. It was about one exchange, 7 interruptions, and the answer that shook the chamber. By the end of the week, the media storm had reached a fever pitch. News panels played Crockett's 8th answer over and over, dissecting every word. Some hosts marveled at her composure under pressure, while others tried to downplay the moment, claiming it was just political theater. But outside the Capitol, it felt very different. Across the country, ordinary viewers shared the clip not as politics, but as inspiration. Parents showed it to their children as proof that standing firm in the face of pressure matters. Students debated it in classrooms, teachers calling it an example of courage under fire. Late-night comedians even weighed in, joking that Justice Jackson had interrupted Crockett so many times she should have been given her own microphone. The audience laughed, but the underlying message was clear. Crockett had turned what should have been a disadvantage into a moment of undeniable strength. Pollsters noticed something unusual too. While most hearings fade quickly from public memory, this one didn't. In small town halls and coffee shops, people were still talking about it. They weren't quoting the interruptions, they were quoting the answer. For Crockett, the sudden wave of attention was both a gift and a test. She had stepped into the national spotlight, but now the question loomed. How would she use it? Crockett sat in her office late into the evening, the glow of headlines and social media trends flickering on her phone. Her aides laid out reports showing a surge in public recognition. For a politician still carving out her lane in Washington, this was an unexpected leap forward. But she wasn't celebrating. She was thinking. Each interruption at the hearing had been a challenge, but her response had turned it into an opportunity. Now she had a choice: let the moment fade like so many viral clips before, or channel the energy into something lasting. An aide suggested drafting a public statement to capitalize on the momentum. Crockett shook her head. If I speak now, it has to mean more than defending myself. It has to be about the people watching. They didn't rally around me because of politics. They rallied because they saw someone refuse to be silenced. Her words settled heavily in the room. Everyone understood that she wasn't just planning a response. She was sketching the start of a movement. Meanwhile, across the city, pundits speculated on what she would do next. Some expected her to retreat and let the storm calm. Others predicted boldness. But no one could say for sure. Crockett leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the Capitol dome glowing against the night sky. 7 interruptions tried to cut me off, she whispered to herself. The 8th made me louder. Now it's time to decide where that voice goes. The following week, Crockett entered the House chamber with a quiet determination. The buzz around her had not died down. It had only grown. Reporters filled the press gallery, waiting to see if the viral moment had been a fluke or the beginning of something larger. When her turn came to speak, the chamber fell into an uneasy silence. Crockett walked to the microphone, set her notes aside, and looked directly at her colleagues. I was interrupted 7 times, she began, her voice steady. And yet, the people only remember the 8th answer. Why? Because the truth has a way of breaking through, no matter how many times you try to cut it off. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, drawn in by the clarity of her words. Crockett pressed on. This is not about me. It is about every voice that has been told to wait its turn. Every citizen who has been talked over. Every American who has been silenced when they demanded to be heard. Washington should be a place where answers matter more than interruptions. And if it isn't, then we have lost our purpose. The chamber was still. For a moment, even her opponents could not look away. Her speech wasn't long, but it was sharp, cutting through the usual noise of politics. When she stepped down, the reaction was immediate. Applause from allies, tense whispers from critics, and once again, the cameras capturing every second. Behind closed doors, the reaction to Crockett's speech was anything but calm. In private caucus rooms, senior lawmakers huddled with their aides, their voices low but sharp. She's taking control of the narrative, one strategist warned. If we don't respond, she'll redefine the rules of engagement. Others scoffed, dismissing her as a momentary trend. But even they couldn't ignore the headlines multiplying by the hour. Commentators were already calling her remarks a line in the sand, and clips of her speech spread online with millions of views. Her opponents began scrambling for a counterattack. Some drafted talking points meant to paint Crockett as reckless, while others considered staging their own high-profile hearings to pull the spotlight back. But the truth gnawed at them. She had spoken with a clarity that was hard to twist. Meanwhile, her allies rallied. Younger lawmakers sent messages of support, seeing her as a symbol of defiance against the old guard. A few even suggested joining forces, turning her viral moment into a broader coalition. Crockett, however, remained careful. She knew backlash was inevitable. What mattered was whether she could stand through the storm and keep her message from being drowned out. Late that night, her phone buzzed with a notification. Another poll, showing a sharp spike in her national recognition. She stared at the numbers, not with pride, but with resolve. The fight wasn't behind her. It was only beginning. Across the country, the debate reached living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces. Crockett's exchange with Justice Jackson and her fiery speech on the House floor weren't just political clips anymore. They had become cultural moments. On talk radio, callers argued passionately. One truck driver said, "I've never watched a hearing in my life, but that woman spoke like she was talking for us." Another caller disagreed, claiming Crockett was grandstanding for the cameras. The divide was sharp, but the conversation was alive everywhere. In small towns, local newspapers ran opinion pieces praising her courage, while in big cities, student groups hosted discussions about what her stand meant for future leaders. Teachers played the clip in civics classes, asking students to analyze how she stayed composed under pressure. Online, her supporters created hashtags that trended for days, pairing her quotes with images of historical figures who had stood against adversity. Critics countered with their own narratives, warning that Crockett was too bold and disruptive. But even in criticism, her name never left the headlines. For many ordinary Americans, the story wasn't about politics at all. It was about refusing to be silenced. Her 8th answer had become a symbol of resilience, one that resonated far beyond Washington's walls. Back in the Capitol, lawmakers watched closely. They knew this was no longer just a hearing, no longer just a speech. It was a movement gaining ground in the heart of the people. Crockett's rise was undeniable, but with recognition came new challenges. Her opponents wasted no time in setting a trap. A new committee hearing was scheduled, and insiders whispered that it had been carefully planned to corner her. The strategy was simple: overwhelm her with rapid questions, twist her words, and paint her as unprepared. They believed that lightning couldn't strike twice, and that the viral moment of her eighth answer was a fluke. When the day arrived, the hearing room was packed. Reporters filled every seat, anticipating a showdown. Crockett took her place, calm but alert, aware that every second would be scrutinized. The questioning began immediately. A senior lawmaker leaned forward, firing off a series of aggressive questions meant to trip her up. The pace was relentless, but Crockett didn't flinch. She listened, paused, and then dismantled each point with clear, precise responses. At one point, an opponent smirked and asked, "Do you really think the American people believe your version of events?" Crockett didn't miss a beat. "I don't expect them to take my word," she said firmly. "I expect them to see the facts for themselves. That's the difference between politics and truth." The room stirred. Her composure under fire was impossible to ignore. Once again, she had turned a trap into an opportunity. Cameras captured every moment, and within hours the clips were spreading online. Her opponents had hoped to silence her. Instead, they had given her an even bigger stage. After the second hearing, the corridors of Congress buzzed with uneasy recognition. Even those who had dismissed Crockett as a momentary sensation now found themselves whispering different words: strategic, unshakable, dangerous. In a closed-door meeting, one senior lawmaker leaned across the table and admitted, "She's not just surviving these hearings, she's rewriting them. Every attack only makes her stronger." His colleagues shifted uncomfortably. They didn't want to acknowledge it, but the evidence was undeniable. Pundits who had once called her inexperienced began softening their tone. Some cautiously praised her composure, while others grudgingly acknowledged that she had tapped into something real. It wasn't admiration, it was respect born from inevitability. Meanwhile, her allies grew bolder. A few approached her privately, offering to back her initiatives, sensing that standing with her now might prove valuable in the future. She listened carefully, never rushing, aware that Washington alliances shift like sand. Late at night, Crockett returned to her office, exhausted but steady. She knew the recognition came with a cost. The more powerful she became, the more determined her enemies would be to bring her down. Yet she also knew something else. Washington feared her not because of her words alone, but because of what she represented. A voice that could not be interrupted into silence. And in the Capitol's marble halls, fear was often the clearest sign of change. The pressure eventually reached Justice Jackson herself. For days, she had remained silent, letting the whirlwind of media and political chatter rage without her input. But silence could only last so long. During a rare press appearance, a reporter asked directly about the now-famous exchange. The question hung heavy in the air. "Do you regret interrupting Representative Crockett so many times?" Justice Jackson adjusted her glasses, choosing her words carefully. "The role of a justice in such hearings is to seek clarity," she said. "But sometimes clarity comes not from the question but from the answer." Representative Crockett made her point with strength, and the public has clearly responded to that. It wasn't an admission of fault, but it was the closest thing to acknowledgement. Washington insiders dissected the statement instantly. Some saw it as a respectful concession, others as a subtle attempt to close the chapter. Either way, it proved that even the justice could not ignore what had happened. Crockett's team watched the footage in her office. One aide whispered, "She just validated everything you said." Crockett, however, stayed calm. "Validation doesn't matter," she replied. "What matters is that the truth was heard, and that people won't forget it." That night, networks replayed Jackson's comments alongside Crockett's eighth answer. The contrast was striking, one cautious, one fearless. For many viewers, it only solidified the sense that Crockett had emerged as the stronger voice. As the weeks passed, whispers about Crockett's future grew louder. What had started as a viral exchange was now evolving into serious political momentum. Inside Washington circles, her name appeared in conversations about leadership roles. Commentators speculated openly. Could she take the reins of a major committee? Could she shape the direction of her party? A few bold voices even suggested she might have the stature to seek higher office in the years ahead. In public forums, her supporters swelled. Town halls overflowed with people eager to hear her speak in person. Campaign donations spiked, not just from her district but from across the country. To many, she was no longer just a representative. She was becoming a symbol of courage against the machinery of interruption and dismissal. But with opportunity came new pressure. Every word she spoke was now dissected, every move analyzed. Opponents launched coordinated campaigns to undermine her credibility, digging through her record for any slip they could weaponize. Old political rivals resurfaced, sensing her growing power and determined to blunt it. Crockett remained steady. Leadership isn't about chasing power, she told her team one evening. It's about showing people that their voices can't be cut off. That's what they're rallying behind, not me, but the principle. Still, even she could not deny the truth. The eighth answer that shook Washington was now shaping her future in ways she had never imagined. The momentum inevitably led to a defining moment, a nationally televised debate. Unlike the hearings, this wasn't confined to the walls of Washington. This time, the entire country would be watching in real time, ready to judge every pause, every word, every gesture. Her opponents viewed it as their best chance. Behind the scenes, they prepared an arsenal of sharp questions and rehearsed interruptions, determined to rattle her composure on the biggest stage yet. Political commentators called it *, Crockett's make-or-break moment. The night of the debate, the stage lights burned bright, the audience buzz. Ed with anticipation, networks flashing the headline. After the eighth answer, Crockett faces the nation. From the opening moments, the pressure was intense. Questions came rapid fire, layered with insinuations meant to corner her. At one point, an opponent leaned in and tried to cut her off mid-sentence. Gasps echoed from the crowd. It was the same tactic that had made her famous. But Crockett didn't falter. She raised her hands slightly, her voice calm yet commanding. You can interrupt me 7 times or 70. The answer won't